Mike, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to talk to you. And I know that your day-to-day hat is that you're Executive Director of Forestry in South Africa. But you also wear another hat, which is that you sit on your children's school board. So I'd love to explore both of these elements with you in connection with what's going on right now and how you've had to adjust. But let's start with forestry. Why not? But how you've had to adjust over the last month or two. And I'm almost reluctant to call them innovations, because by our very nature, everything that we're doing right now is trying to create some new way forward out of the old. So in a way, we are innovating day to day. But what's been going on for you around forestry and the essential services?
Yeah, so interesting question, Louise. Thanks for that. For us, when the lockdown was announced, it was literally like the lights went out. Everybody was in the same boat. I'd had a meeting with one of our vice presidents of one of our large forestry companies, with the director general in Pretoria, and driving there, he said he has a numb feeling. This was literally the day after our president announced the lockdown. He said, because he doesn't actually know what this means. He's never felt so uncertain in his life. And this is a leader of a large company. And I think that's how we all felt. The lights went out. And, then as the hours and the days started to pass and you're thinking about, so what is it that this means for our specific sector? And government was very adamant that only essential services and essential products could start to function. You started to look at to say, well, do we provide any of those? And it became apparent quite quickly when you look at the forestry value chains that in actual fact, a lot of the goods that government listed in its first set of regulations, food, medicines, packaging for food and medicines, energy, are products that are using our raw materials or our semi-finished products as the basis for their production. So it was quite easy to start to approach government to say, listen, firstly, just as there was worldwide, there's been a massive run on toilet paper. So
right.
Where did that come from? Our industry, So hygiene, basic hygiene is going to be important. But then all the disposable masks, disposable medical dishes that are used in the hospitals, food packaging, food itself. A lot of people don't realize how much, people often say you can't eat trees. Well, I've got news for them. We're eating trees every single day of our lives. Every time you take a tablet, the white in the tablet, the filling material, 99% of it is microcrystalline cellulose. Every time you eat a fat food product, every time you brush your teeth, when you look through spectacles, you're using timber-based products. And it became apparent to people that, in actual fact, forestry touches our lives on a daily basis, both in the hygiene space and in the food space, literally daily, as I said. And packaging, a big thing. Food packaging, medical packaging, cardboard packaging, all of these things were included as essential services. The challenge then was to engage with government to say, well, you haven't listed forestry and you haven't listed all of our forest products. But in actual fact, the people and the industries that you want to see continue depend on us. And so they then came back to us and said, absolutely, if you are ancillary to the production of food or directly involved in the production of food, you may continue to operate. So through that process, we were able to keep for the first 3-4 weeks about 70% of our productive capacity as an industry going, which was wonderful. Of course, our industry said, look, that's absolutely fantastic. But then at the same time, you now have to start to implement controls, hygiene controls, social distancing controls, stuff that has never been factored into your operations before that. So that, I think, is where a lot of the initial shock, it was almost like going into a cinema. Rather than the lights being turned off, you went into cinema, you couldn't see anything for a moment. And then as the days went by, you started to see actually there's a fair amount that we can distill out of this darkness that seems to have fallen on the country. So that's how it's been working for our industry. And then we've been systematically trying to get further concessions for government for other stuff that's not necessarily essential, but is a co-product. So if you're opening a sawmill, for example, to produce sawn timber to produce pallets for moving food, you're also in the same process sawing that timber for roof trusses, but you can't sell that timber because housing is not considered an essential service at this stage. So we've been trying to say to government, if we're operating anyway and we're producing that product anyway, can you try and open up other sectors like construction so that we can sell that product? Agriculture have the same issue. Motor manufacturing have the same issue. And Kevin Lings, just this morning in the Business Day, was quoted as saying, it's easy to switch an economy off, There's a decree, and His Royal Highness says that's it, no more anything. Switching it back on again is a lot harder. So we were very fortunate in the sense that we didn't have a complete shutdown in our sector. There were some restrictions, and we've been slowly getting those liberalized with the necessary risk-adjusted measures in place to prevent the further spread and control the spread of this COVID-19 virus.
Like, that's amazing. I just learned a huge amount around forestry that I had absolutely no awareness of. And I think that it's really interesting at the moment. The minute that we dig into any particular sector, we're realizing, perhaps I'm slow to learn here, but I'm realizing how deeply interconnected everything is. And I think that without a doubt, this pandemic has shown us all how deeply connected and interconnected we are, not only from a business perspective, but personally. And I guess that leads to my next question. My curiosity has been massively aroused in terms of, well, what else could that mean, and how else does that touch on other businesses? But if we look at a process of refinement over coming months, and I know the future is not easy to tap into right now or to have any sense of, but are there things within your system, vulnerabilities within your system, that you think can be better refined now so that you come out, at least parts of your sector, being stronger? Is there anything that you've picked up on already?
So maybe not as a direct consequence of the virus itself, but certainly from a regulatory perspective. We've been the stepchild for many years, forestry, and that's not a South African problem globally. I mean, you've mentioned now, Louise, that you weren't aware of all the products that we produce. Most people aren't, my own family included. And people say to us, why aren't you doing more to promote forestry? One of the problems that we have in our sector is that we are what Professor Hertzberg, the late Professor Hertzberg, would have called a hygiene sector. He speaks about motivational factors and hygiene factors. Food is a motivating factor. You take food away from people, or people don't have food, they get excited at the prospect of eating. Nobody gets excited at the prospect of blowing your nose. Nobody gets excited at the prospect of taking a tablet. So our products are what Hertzberg would have classified as hygiene products, not because a lot of them are hygiene. A roof truss is what he would call a hygiene product. It doesn't motivate you to have it. It doesn't excite you. But when it's not there, it's a demotivator. And that's what our products are. If you don't have your medicines, if you don't have tissue, if you don't have paper towels when you've washed your hands, if you don't have a roof over your house, you suddenly miss or appreciate our products when they aren't there. So that's why I'm trying to have a proactive marketing campaign to say, forestry touches your lives, washing powders, toothpaste, your spectacles. They're not really aspirational or motivating products. You miss them when they're not there. So that's one of the things that has made forestry difficult to get onto the radar of government in this country and elsewhere. But a benefit, maybe not a vulnerability, but a benefit that's come out of this through that historical vulnerability is it has raised the awareness in just the way that you've described now.
Well, it's so interesting, right? Because whenever I've thought of forestry, certainly in recent years, and listening to Greta and various other climate change people, really we're always talking about deforestation.
Yeah.
And essentially forestry is a very different controlled industry, right? I mean, it's a completely different. So I think that connection between something negative and bad for the planet and something that essentially, fulfills our lives from a hygiene perspective, and the regrowth and replanting and how it's managed in a controlled way are very different. So I agree. There's definitely an opportunity from a not just marketing, but from a human connection perspective for people to get much more connected to what they're using and how they're using it and where it comes from. And perhaps this is part of the interesting, I'm not sure if I thoroughly agree with this great reset idea, but perhaps this is part of the reconnection that we're all having, an understanding of where our stuff comes from, that we're quite happy to consume every day and perhaps not be able to, perhaps haven't understood where it's all come from. Like in terms of futures, I mean, if we had to, I know it's tough. So I'm asking really tough questions. I know, forgive me. But if we had to look at this playing out over time, yes, there is a repositioning that would be hugely advantageous to the industry. But if we look at parts of this industry that could be automated or things that could be done better for the future to align with a more holistic future, what are your thoughts around that?
So, look, a lot of that, as I said, was happening anyway. And I liked your introduction, Louise. I agree with you. I think most innovation is incremental. This idea that, we have these eureka moments or we get taken up by left field, often it is accidental, but it's not even in your industry that the innovations come about. In our sector, systematically, we have been innovating. And the innovations start right from the nursery where we raise the seedlings for planting out into the timber plantations, all the way through to the kinds of products that are being produced. Sugars, xylitol is big at the moment, and there's a big program domestically to start extracting sugars from timber. It's the good non-nutritive sweetener, we like to say. Nanocrystalline cellulose. This stuff starts to get at the molecular level into shape-shifting products. So, like all of us, you think about forestry, you think of trees, and you think of sawn timber, and you don't think of the multitude of other products that are derived. In actual fact, you can do with timber everything that you can do with coal. And it's renewable and it's carbon positive in many instances. And in fact, there's stuff you can do with timber that you don't really want to do with coal. If you've seen the way the globe has moved away from BPA plastics, and now you've seen plant-based plastics in bottles and so on, there are a lot of innovative opportunities. But as I said, they're not necessarily a function of the crisis, but maybe the crisis sharpens people's thinking in that regard. Necessity is the mother of all invention. If certain product lines have been switched off because of the crisis, what else can we produce? So I think the real opportunity for innovation in our sector is the agility that this crisis might produce, to say you need to not be a vertically integrated company specializing in one or two big lines. It's what's happening with forestry elsewhere in the world. We talk about biorefineries now instead of pulp and paper plants, because you're taking in a renewable biological feedstock, and you can produce a plethora of products out of it and use them to suit what the society and the economy needs at any given time. And I think that's the real benefit. Those are the sort of innovations. Certainly on the mechanization side, that's been a feature of our industry for the last 10 years. There's been a massive movement of people from rural areas to urban areas in South Africa. In 94, about 60% of people lived in rural areas. Now only 40% of people do. So finding reliable sources of workers who want to work in this industry and many other rural-based industries, increasingly difficult. So a lot of our bigger companies have already gone on a massive mechanization drive. And incidentally, one of them, no names, no petrol, when this crisis hit, said, well, there's an opportunity here to not take in timber that's been touched by human hands. So they've been running entirely on timber that has only been harvested and transported using mechanized operations. Not a single human being has touched that timber, even from the felling process. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that sort of thing coming through. I think margins are going to be under pressure for the next decade, possibly 2 decades, across sectors. Even when demand is back, it's not going to be as robust as it was before. And as I said, maybe for different types of products. So I think people are going to be a little bit more specialized in the markets that they target, those that offer the best returns, and also speak to companies' institutional strengths, or their core strengths.
Yeah, extraordinary. So my head is just buzzing full of, so there's the people side of things. And of course, some may argue, well, okay, more job losses to unskilled or skilled, semi-skilled people. But what can we do to actually to upskill people within the industry? Because I'm sure that there must be vast swathes of areas that need people who are upskilled and able to actually work with this new push around automation and the products and services that would come out of that.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to assume anything. So I guess the responsibility then is also playing that back to the organizations in terms of their movement towards automation, to actually take people with them, because unless we take society with us, we're left with a problem there.
So that's the good news. There's a good news story there, Louise. So
tell me.
The one company that I was speaking about saw right up front what impact this would have on communities, the rural economic landscape, and so on. So they started reskilling. A lot of them have been doing enterprise development initiatives even before it was required under the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And they said, right, let's start rejigging our investment spend in supporting enterprises to say, maybe people that are currently working for us as chainsaw operators and so on and so forth, we can put them into positions of enterprises that can supply goods and services to our industry, or in actual fact to other industries. We don't mind. Let's use our spend, our investment into broad-based Black economic empowerment and the transformation of the South African landscape to help our own people first, who will be negatively affected by this mechanization drive, or modernization drive. The other reason that companies went in this direction, Louise, as you know, is we have a very high health burden in this country. So in timbers, forestry is arduous work. It's usually performed by women, which most people don't know. Most of our workers, unskilled laborers, are women in rural areas, and it's back-breaking work. So this company said, we don't think this is work we want to be having people do for a long time, because by the time they get to 35 and 40, they're negatively affected from a health perspective. So let's rather get these people, these women, into different types of jobs, and let's support them as the industry. So the industry's been quite far-sighted in that regard. It is a long-sighted industry, Louise. If you talk to anybody in a business school, to do a discounted cash flow on a mine over 8 years is a long time. We can grow timber over a 25-year period. So you're making investment decisions now, and you're hoping, ceteris paribus, everything will remain equal in 25 years' time from a market perspective. So we're blessed as an industry to have people who generally have a long planning horizon. We're a bit like the Chinese, because you have to make the best possible decisions now, not knowing what your market's going to look like in 8 years' time when those trees mature, or in 25 years' time if you're growing long rotation sawn timber. So I think we've got a lot of high-level thinkers that are thinking about these things into the future. Personally, we've been running so fast during this crisis, I haven't given it a lot of thought about what the future looks like. We're just trying to consolidate and hang on to as much as we possibly can through this process, but also to be relevant and to support the cause.
Yeah, so vital. And I love the reframing, the contextualization of 25 years, because it shape shifts. And without a doubt, what we've seen in terms of a global movement is a movement back towards natural products, natural, I don't even have the words for this stuff, but
renewable.
There we go. Okay.
So important,
Yeah, right, and moving away from the plastic fantastic. So in my limited knowledge, all of that sounds like, from an innovation perspective, it's going to be a constant movement towards, and without a doubt, I think this virus, if ever we needed to kickstart that movement towards real appreciation in terms of where the consumerism that we've been part of, and how a lot of that really needs to reset. If ever there was a reset, I think it's going to be around mindset.
More mindful consumption, absolutely.
Which will change, of course, what organizations deliver to us to meet that need. So, Mike, thank you so much. And I'd love to come back, and I'm saying this to a lot of people right now in a few months' time, and actually ask you the same questions, because I think by then, as you say, right now it's just run as fast as you can to make sure that your industry is collectively moving in the right direction. But I have one last question. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So I have one last question. This is around schools, because you're on your school board. And just in terms of education, we've almost got this rare opportunity to, through virtualization, digitization, to democratize education in a way that we haven't had a window for before. And how do we seize this? So of course, with any change, it represents loss, but it also represents an opportunity for growth, albeit in a different way. And because we don't know what it looks like, it can be pretty fearful. However, within that, finding a better, smarter way forward for all concerned is the big question. And if we don't seize that, we really, in my view, have missed an opportunity. And just with what you're saying around your school, with your board, what's going on at the moment? What are the changes that are happening? Of course, they're very practical changes, we all understand. But what do you foresee in terms of, the future? But I'm thinking 3 months, 6 months, I'm thinking short-term changes.
Yeah. Well, the short-term changes are a lot easier to quantify, Louise. I think every school in this country is going through the same process. So what are we going to do about revenue? Parents are asking, well, if the schools remain closed, should we be paying school fees? If the answer to that is yes, because the schools need to still teach in this new teaching, remote teaching and learning environment, what costs can we get rid of? But also, even if, the minister said schools can go back and kids can go back tomorrow, the parents are under financial pressure. So parents who've been laid off or put on reduced time, they can no longer afford the school fees the way they were. So that's the here and now, and that's the short term, and I think everybody's doing that. But your question is much more interesting when you start talking about the 3 to 6 month horizon and in years to come. And, we've seen as a country and certainly globally a big move towards homeschooling over the past decade or so. It used to start off with people on farms that couldn't access schools. Then it became people who became disillusioned with the quality of education or the ethos that was being carried through in state schools. So there's already been what has been an absolute eye-opener for me, and I think even for our teachers at our school, is what's already available online. So our school and many other schools are using existing platforms like Seesaw and Google Classroom that, to be honest, I don't think a lot of the teachers even knew existed, because these weren't the tools they were using on a daily basis. And all of a sudden, a lot of the teachers, in terms of the upskilling that you're talking about, are now becoming proficient. That's the first thing. The second thing is the kids themselves that are receiving their education via these technologies are becoming computer savvy. So the kids are uploading videos, they've got to upload their work. The teachers are able to mark the work online, give feedback, virtual stickers instead of the little physical stickers. And so it's exciting to see, I think, how the teachers and the pupils and even the parents have embraced it. But I think there are going to be long-term systemic changes where people start saying, well, this is actually working for us. Unless I need my kid to be on a school with the campus and having all the social interactions and all the cultural and sporting activities, if they're not that way inclined, I think we might see some long-term sort of hemorrhaging, for want of a better word, of parents are saying, in actual fact, I'm happy for my kid to continue to do this in an online environment. So that's the second thing. The third thing is schools may need to think about a hybrid model. So at the moment, we're all saying, look, there's no way we can do both. When we go back to school, we're stopping the online. And while we're online, we're not going to try and open the school for a few pupils. Practically, we can't do that. But there might be a need to consider that in the future if you want to retain existing pupils who may choose. And parents may say, we want our kid to stay at home beyond the crisis because in actual fact, this works for us. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you've developed these capabilities as a school to provide your materials online, who else could you take these to? Could you take them to less fortunate schools that don't have the same resources? Could you augment with government's offering into schools in rural areas and inner city areas where these schools are not up to scratch and say, let's start making this information available to a much broader audience. But then you need to be current and relevant and be the best of your game because every other school will have been developing online materials. So I think there's going to be some quite significant sea shifts in the education space in the medium to long term that do present opportunities, but it also present some risks. If you don't need the whole campus anymore because your physical school presence of pupils is reduced, so schools need to think about what could they do with the additional campus space, and do they need to be as big as they used to be? How important is sport? You've seen a lot of the sort of lower cost independent schools coming up that aren't offering the full suite of sporting offerings, and they've been inundated in demand. If you think about Cura and Advotech and schools like that, yes, of course, things have been difficult over the last few years because the economy has been depressed. We went into this crisis on our knees as a country. But even when the economy rebounds and comes back very strongly, I expect there'll be quite a big shift in the way people are requesting education in this country. And by the way, not just at the school level, at university level. I have a child or two children still at university. They're doing all of their stuff online. One of my kids is doing lectures via London, and they're all up, and they have to be in attendance, and they have to be there. So, we've been spending a small fortune educating him overseas, but in actual fact, maybe he could have done this via remote learning anyway in this format. So I think this is going to be quite a big sea change for industries like that, or sectors like that, where remote work or remote learning is an option.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, Mike? I think that without doubt that one of the industries that we're going to see the most tangible change the most quickly is education across the board. And in countries like South Africa, where we really, the root of all of our concerns about the future are in the education of our young people, I think there's a massive opportunity to change the game completely. And I'll certainly be watching this sector with a huge amount of interest. And I love your perspective as well in terms of, hankering after that expensive education abroad. Well, there are two parts to it. One is the socialization, because where does our education start as adults, young adults? It probably starts with travel, right?
Yeah,
and experiencing different cultures and starting to actually understand that the world works in many different ways, perhaps slightly differently from what we understand or our own experience of life.
indeed.
And perhaps, how do we work in the school of life into that? And perhaps education is one thing, and travel and school of life and working our way around the world. Perhaps we'll go back to the old sort of gap year, part-time, and maybe it's hybrid. Who knows? But pretty exciting. And I think the most exciting thing, I think, is the foundation education system, and how there's this incredible opportunity with the door wide open for everybody to contribute to the creation of that. Because if it's left to the old way, clearly it'll get stuck.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much. It's been such an enlightening conversation. I have to say, I've really enjoyed it. And I'll definitely come back to you. Yeah, in a month or two. And perhaps, let's explore some similar, the same topics and see where we're at and what's actually going on.
I'd love to do that. Thanks for the opportunity, Louise. It's been nice chatting to you.
My pleasure.
Take